The night Miss Serena Ashwood was insulted by a duke in front of all of London's finest society, she did the one thing no one expected. She answered him, not with tears, not with silence, not with the carefully measured retreat that well-bred young women were trained to perform when humiliation arrived, wearing a perfectly tied cravat. She answered him with words that landed like stones in still water, and the ripples, as ripples always do, spread far beyond what anyone could have predicted, including the Earl who stood watching from across the room, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand, and the sudden, unshakable certainty that everything he thought he understood about the London season had just changed. The fog had rolled in from the Thames by 8:30, curling against the windows of Lord Ashmore's townhouse, on Eaton Square like something alive and curious. Inside, 500 candles burned in the chandeliers, and the air smelled of hothouse lilies, warm wax, and the particular tension that only a London ballroom in full season could produce, the tension of people performing for one another with extraordinary dedication. "You are holding your fan incorrectly." Serena Ashwood turned to find her younger sister Clara at her elbow, expression earnest and slightly panicked beneath her careful composure. "I am holding my fan," Serena said, "in the way that feels natural. Nothing about this evening is supposed to feel natural." Clara glanced around the room with the bright, anxious eyes of someone cataloguing threats. Mrs. Pemberton told Mamma that a fan tilted at that angle communicates availability of the most unsuitable kind. "Mrs. Pemberton," Serena said pleasantly, "has opinions about everything and knowledge of very little." She adjusted the fan regardless, not because she believed it mattered, but because Clara's nerves were already wound tight enough to snap, and small concessions cost nothing. "There, tilted correctly. Are we proper now?" "We are attempting to be," Clara murmured, which was, Serena reflected, the most honest summary of the Ashwood family's current situation she had ever heard. 6 months had passed since the letter arrived from a solicitor in Bath, a letter that had required 3 readings before any of them believed its contents. A great-uncle twice removed, a branch of the family that had been spoken of in hushed, vaguely embarrassed tones for as long as Serena could remember, had died without direct heirs. The estate in Kent, the investments managed quietly for 40 years, the modest but genuine title that attached to the land, all of it had passed, through a genealogical chain of unlikely connections, to their father. The money was real. The land was real. The title, Lady Ashwood, applied now to their mother with an expression of permanent bewilderment, was real. The acceptance of London society was considerably less certain. They had arrived in Mayfair in March with new gowns and genuine goodwill, and absolutely no idea what they were doing. Their mother had retained a social secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Miss Croft, who spoke in precise, rapid sentences and seemed to find the entire undertaking both professionally fascinating and personally exhausting. Their father had retreated to his study with the estate accounts and emerged only for meals, looking simultaneously proud and terrified. And Serena, who was the eldest, who had always been the one who navigated the gap between what things were and what they were supposed to be, had done what she always did. She paid attention. She had paid attention to the way invitations were worded and what the wording meant. To the difference between a genuine smile and a social one, a distinction she had, she felt, become expert in distinguishing. To the geography of ballrooms, which had hierarchies as fixed and complex as any map she had ever studied, the fireplace end was for people of consequence, the window end was for people still proving it. The Ashwoods, on this particular evening in Lord Ashmore's house in Belgravia, were stationed firmly near the second set of windows. This did not trouble Serena. What she found as she stood with Clara and watched 500 people perform their careful social choreography was not anxiety, but a persistent, helpless fascination. They were all of them, herself included, engaged in an elaborate fiction, and yet the fiction produced real consequences, real alliances, real lives. There was something almost magnificent about it, if you could stand far enough back to see the whole of it at once. "The gentleman by the third pillar," Clara said quietly, "has looked at you 4 times. Serena did not turn immediately. She had learned that much. "Which gentleman?" "Tall. Dark coat. The kind of face that seems designed to make you feel you have said something slightly foolish without knowing why." That description, Serena thought, could apply to approximately 1/3 of the men in the room. But she turned, casually, taking a sip of lemonade as cover, and found him. Robert Ellsworth, Earl of Ashbourne, was exactly as her sister described, except that Clara had not mentioned the quality of stillness about him, the way he occupied space without seeming to demand it. He stood slightly apart from the group nearest him, not isolated but not entirely present either, and he was, yes, looking in their direction. He was not, Serena noted, looking at Clara. She returned her gaze to the middle distance before he could catch her observing him. Her cheeks felt warm. She chose to attribute this to the candles. "He is the Earl of Ashbourne," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "He is known for being observant, for preferring books to conversation, and for never having shown particular interest in any young woman during 3 consecutive seasons. How do you know that?" "I have been paying attention." She took another sip of lemonade. "Also, Miss Croft has briefed me on everyone of consequence within a 10-foot radius at every event we have attended." Clara almost smiled. "And is he of consequence?" "He is an earl with a considerable estate in Derbyshire, and no known vices beyond occasional silence." Serena paused. "By the standards of this room, that makes him rather spectacularly consequential." She did not look at him again, or she tried not to. She was moderately successful. The evening progressed with the stately rhythm of such events: dancing, introductions, the careful circulation of people who wanted to be seen speaking to the right other people. The Ashwoods were introduced to several matrons who were kind in the specific way of those who have not yet decided whether you are worth their genuine interest. They were introduced to 2 young men who were pleasant and forgettable. Lady Ashwood, their mother, was introduced to a viscountess she had apparently known 20 years ago, and fell into animated conversation with an expression of profound relief. Serena danced twice, once with a baronet's son who stepped on her foot and apologized so extensively she began to feel she was the one who should console him, and once with a naval captain who spoke exclusively about his ship and seemed surprised to discover the ballroom contained other people. Neither encounter was unpleasant. Neither produced anything she would think about later. It was near 10 o'clock during the interval between sets that Edmund Hartley made his presence known. She had not paid particular attention to the Duke of Calderwick before that night. She had noticed him the way you noticed a piece of furniture that was too large for a room. His presence created a kind of pressure, a rearrangement of the space around him. He was 36, broad-shouldered, handsome in the hard, finished way of a man who had always been told so. He moved through the ballroom with the specific ease of someone who had never, in his entire life, stood near the windows. He was speaking to 2 other men when Serena passed, passing because she was making her way back toward her mother, and there was no other convenient route. She was not paying him any attention. She was thinking about whether Clara had managed to locate the refreshment table. She heard his voice a fraction of a second before she registered that it was directed at her. "Another new arrival attempting the climb," he said. Not low, not whispered, the tone of a man who did not consider the possibility that the subject of his observation might hear. "How very determined they are." A pause, weighted and deliberate. A plain little duckling attempting to swim with swans. The room did not stop. The music did not halt. 500 people continued their careful performances, and yet something shifted in the immediate vicinity, a subtle constriction, like a collective held breath among the 8 or 10 people close enough to hear. Serena stopped. She had not planned to. Her feet simply ceased their forward motion, operated by some instinct older and more direct than calculation. She turned slowly and looked at the Duke of Calderwick. He was watching her with an expression of mild, aristocratic amusement. The 2 men beside him had gone carefully still in the way of people who are about to witness something and have not yet decided how they feel about it. The heat that rose in Serena was not quite what she would have expected. It was not purely shame, though shame was there, sharp and immediate, the involuntary flinch of a wound. It was something else alongside it, something that had spent 22 years being compressed by good manners and common sense and the practical wisdom of knowing your place, something that had grown, in the past 6 months of navigating ballrooms like this one, considerably less patient than it used to be. She met his gaze. The smile she offered him was entirely, specifically serene. "I appreciate the zoological comparison, Your Grace," she said. Her voice was steady, steadier than she'd known she could make it. "Though I confess I find the metaphor imprecise. Ducklings, I believe, generally become themselves in time, without apology. She paused, just long enough. And I would rather be exactly what I am, someone who has not yet learned to mistake cruelty for wit, than mistake borrowed elegance for genuine worth. I do not lose hope of meeting someone who sees the world as I do, and who accepts me as I am. That hope I carry proudly. As I do the person I have become, which is, I think, more than some in this room can say. The silence that followed was of a different quality than the one before. It had texture. The Duke's expression did not change, but something beneath it shifted, a tightening around the eyes, a recalibration. He said nothing. Serena inclined her head, a courtesy, precisely measured, no more and no less than the situation required, and turned to continue toward her mother. She had taken perhaps 4 steps when she heard footsteps behind her, deliberate and unhurried. Not the Duke's. She knew without looking that he had not moved. These were different. "Miss Ashwood." She turned. Robert Ellsworth stood before her, and up close he was more than the sum of his description. The brown eyes were direct and unreadable in a way that had nothing to do with coldness, and he was looking at her with an attention that felt, disconcertingly, like being genuinely seen. "I believe," he said, "the next set is about to begin." He extended his hand. "If you are not otherwise engaged, it would be my considerable honor." The room, which had collectively been pretending not to watch, collectively pretended more intently. Serena studied him for a moment. She was, she realized, looking for theater, for the practiced gesture of a man performing generosity in public. She found something different. His jaw was set, not in anger, but in the particular resolution of someone who has made a decision and does not intend to revise it. There was nothing performing about him. Whatever this was, it was, whatever the reason, real. She placed her hand in his. "The honor," she said quietly, "is mutual, my lord." The Tun watched Robert Ellsworth, Earl of Ashbourne, a man who had not shown marked interest in any young woman in 3 consecutive seasons, lead Miss Serena Ashwood, new money and new title and utterly outside the expected order of things, onto the floor as the musicians struck up a waltz. The Duke of Calderwick watched too. Serena looked straight ahead, at Robert's cravat at the middle distance above his shoulder. Her heart was doing something complicated, and she did not intend to give it the satisfaction of showing. "You are thinking," Robert said, low enough that only she could hear, "that this is a public gesture and you are uncertain what to make of it." She glanced up at him, startled. "Are you in the habit of announcing people's thoughts to them?" "Only when they seem inconveniently accurate." The corner of his mouth moved. It was not quite a smile, but it had ambitions in that direction. "I am also thinking, for the sake of full transparency, that what you said to Calderwick was one of the more precisely executed pieces of social surgery I have witnessed in some years." "Social surgery," she repeated. "You cut exactly as deep as required and no deeper. It is harder than it looks." Serena considered this. Around them, other couples moved in the patterns of the waltz, and the candlelight made everything amber and soft, and the fog continued to press against the windows from outside. "Most people," she said carefully, "would call it impertinence." "Most people," he replied, "were not listening as closely as I was." It was a small thing to say. It meant, perhaps, nothing beyond its face value. And yet something in the phrasing, "not what you said but I was listening," lodged itself in her attention and refused to be easily dislodged. They danced. He was a good dancer, not showy but entirely capable, the kind of competence that came from doing a thing properly rather than performing it. He did not fill the silence with chatter, which she found, to her surprise, more comfortable than the reverse. Most of the men she had danced with this season had spoken continuously, filling every pause with observations about the music, the weather, the decoration, as though silence between strangers were a problem requiring immediate solution. Robert Ellsworth seemed to understand that silence could be a room 2 people stood in together, rather than an absence. "Your family has been in London since March," he said, as they turned at the far end of the floor. "We have. How are you finding it?" She considered being politic. Then she remembered that she had just said in front of a duke and 10 witnesses that she refused to mistake borrowed elegance for genuine worth, and felt that politeness had been, for this evening at least, sufficiently exercised. "Fascinating," she said honestly, "and occasionally bewildering, and sometimes, not often, but sometimes, genuinely lovely." His gaze moved to her face with renewed attention. Most people say simply that they are enjoying it very much. Most people, she said, borrowing his construction back with deliberate neatness, are not as interested in accuracy as I am. This time, the corner of his mouth became an actual smile. Brief, contained but unmistakably real. It rearranged his face in a way that made him look several years younger and considerably less formidable, and Serena had the disconcerting experience of needing to look away. The waltz ended. He returned her to her mother's side with a bow precise enough to satisfy the most exacting observer, and a glance that lasted exactly 2 seconds longer than courtesy required. Serena watched him cross the room. Clara appeared at her elbow within 30 seconds. "That," Clara said in a voice that suggested she was exercising considerable restraint, "was the Earl of Ashbourne." "I am aware. He has not danced with anyone this season." "So I have heard." Clara looked at her with the expression of someone sitting on a great many more words than they have chosen to deploy. "Are you all right? After what happened before?" "Yes." And she was, which surprised her slightly. The sting was still there. These things did not vanish because you answered them well, but it had a different quality now, less like a wound and more like a scar already beginning to form. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "that I am quite all right." Across the room she caught Robert Ellsworth's gaze for half a second before he looked away. She did not attribute the subsequent warmth to the candles. Before we continue this story, if you are new here, welcome. This channel is dedicated to bringing you rich emotional historical romances, full of unforgettable characters, and the kind of love stories that stay with you long after the final chapter. If you are enjoying this one, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you know, and it means these stories find the people who love them most. And if Serena's words to that Duke gave you chills, tell me in the comments. I read every single one. The following week proved, as weeks in London at that time tended to prove, that the events of a single night could completely reconfigure the social geometry of an entire season. By the following Tuesday, the story of what had occurred at Lord Ashmore's ball had been told in 6 drawing rooms, 4 morning calls, and at least 2 clubs that did not officially acknowledge the existence of gossip. The particulars varied. In some versions, Serena had spoken longer. In others, she had been more cutting. In at least one retelling, she had apparently reduced the Duke to stunned silence so complete that he had needed assistance to locate his hat. But the essential architecture remained consistent. A new arrival had been insulted by Calderwick, had answered him with unexpected precision, and had subsequently been singled out for the first dance of the Earl of Ashbourne's season. The Ashwoods received 7 more invitations the following week than they had the week before. Their mother received them with a mixture of gratitude and terror that Serena found deeply endearing. 7, Lady Ashwood said, sorting through them at the breakfast table with the expression of someone who has found money in an old coat and is not certain it is real. 7, Serena. Yes, Mama. Is this because of what you said to the Duke? I expect it is partly that and partly Lord Ashbourne's attention. She poured her tea. Society rewards boldness when it succeeds. It is less forgiving when it fails. But we seem at present to be in the former category. Lord Ashbourne, her mother repeated. She set down an invitation to a card party in Chelsea. He has not called. It has been 4 days, Mama. He is not obligated to call. No, but... Lady Ashwood picked up another card, turned it over. He danced with you as though he meant to. This was, Serena thought privately, an accurate observation. She had replayed the conversation more times than she intended. His directness, the unhurried quality of his attention, the 2 seconds too long, and arrived each time at the same conclusion. She did not know what it meant, and she was not going to permit herself to speculate, because speculation in situations like this one had the unpleasant tendency of producing expectations that reality then failed to meet. She was quite firm about this. He called on Thursday. He arrived at precisely 3 o'clock, which was, Miss Croft had informed the Ashwood household with characteristic precision, the correct hour for a social call that intended to be taken seriously without communicating urgency. He brought no flowers. Serena noted this with something she refused to call relief, and he sat in the drawing room with the same quality of contained stillness she had observed at the ball, as though he were a man accustomed to occupying spaces without requiring them to rearrange themselves around him. Their mother received him. Clara sat in the corner with her embroidery and the expression of someone performing embroidery while actually listening to every word. Serena poured tea. The conversation was, by the standards of social calls, unremarkable. He inquired after their impressions of the city. Lady Ashwood spoke about the parks. Clara contributed 2 observations about the botanical gardens that were genuinely interesting and then retreated back behind her hoop. Serena said less than she wanted to and more than she had planned, which was, she was beginning to suspect, going to be a recurring feature of conversations with this particular man. He stayed exactly 25 minutes. He accepted 1 cup of tea. Before he left, he paused at the door and said, to the room in general, which somehow felt like it was directed at her specifically, "There is a literary discussion at Hartfield's rooms in Marylebone next Wednesday. A small gathering. The subject is natural philosophy and its intersection with contemporary thought. I wonder if the Miss Ashwoods might find it of interest." Clara's embroidery needle stopped moving. Lady Ashwood said that it sounded very educational. Serena said that it sounded, in fact, exactly like the kind of thing she found interesting. Robert Ellsworth looked at her, that direct, unhurried look, and said he was glad to hear it. Then he left, and the drawing room felt for a moment slightly larger than it needed to be. "Natural philosophy," Clara said, the moment the front door closed. "It is a legitimate intellectual pursuit. He is an earl. Earls are permitted to be interested in natural philosophy." Clara set down her embroidery entirely. "Serena." "Clara." They regarded each other. Their mother had already picked up the invitation she had been holding and was studying it with renewed attention, performing ignorance of the entire exchange with endearing unsuccess. "He came," Clara said finally quietly. "He came 4 days after the ball, and he remembered that you argued with me about the mechanics of the tidal system during the Whitmore dinner, and he found an event that would matter to you specifically." She paused. "That is not nothing." Serena looked at the door through which Robert Ellsworth had departed. She thought about the conversation at the ball. I was listening. And about the 25 minutes and the 1 cup of tea and the specific, unhurried quality of his attention. "No," she said after a moment, "it is not nothing." She poured herself more tea and did not say anything else, but she was, she realized, looking forward to Wednesday with an intensity that had very little to do with natural philosophy. The rooms at Hartfield's Literary Society occupied the 2nd floor of a narrow Georgian building on Beaumont Street, reached by a staircase that smelled pleasantly of old wood and paper. Serena had expected something formal, a lecture perhaps with rows of chairs and a speaker at a podium. What she found instead was a room of perhaps 20 people arranged in loose groups around small tables, several conversations happening simultaneously, and a fire burning despite the mildness of the April evening, because, as she would later learn, the rooms at Hartfield's always had a fire, on the principle that intellectual discussion was best conducted in warmth. Robert was already there when they arrived, speaking with an older gentleman near the bookshelf. He saw them enter and crossed the room, not hurrying, but not delaying either, with the directness of a man who had decided to do a thing and saw no reason to perform hesitation. "Miss Ashwood." He greeted Clara as well with genuine courtesy rather than the perfunctory acknowledgement of someone who considered a younger sister an inconvenience. Clara, who had arrived prepared to observe with scientific detachment, looked slightly disarmed. "I am glad you came. The gentleman I was just speaking with is Dr. Pemberton, no relation, I believe, to the Mrs. Pemberton you have encountered elsewhere." He said this with the most fractional of inflections that suggested he had, in fact, heard about Mrs. Pemberton's views on fan angles. "And he has done some remarkable work on atmospheric pressure. I thought you might find him worth speaking to." Serena looked at him. "You arranged an introduction." "I mentioned to him that some new arrivals to the society had interests in natural science." He paused. "The arrangement was perhaps not entirely accidental. It was such a small thing, such a quietly deliberate small thing, the kind of gesture that cost nothing and meant, depending entirely on the intention behind it, everything or nothing at all. She was not going to read intention into it. She was absolutely firm on this point. "Thank you," she said simply. They spoke to Dr. Pemberton, who was 73, enthusiastic, and possessed of opinions about cloud formations so detailed and fervent that Clara, within 10 minutes, had produced a small notebook from her reticule and begun taking notes. Serena found herself in a conversation about the relationship between atmospheric observation and predictive science that lasted considerably longer than she expected, and at some point she realized that Robert had joined it, and that he was not hovering on the edges of it, performing interest but actually engaged, asking questions that revealed genuine familiarity with the subject, pushing back on Dr. Pemberton's conclusions with the specific confidence of someone who had read the relevant texts and formed his own opinions. "You disagree with Dalton's conclusions," she said, when there was a pause. "On the specific point of mixed gas behavior, yes." He looked at her. "You've read Dalton." "I have read everything I could find." She kept her voice neutral, watching for the reaction she had learned to anticipate. The faint recalibration, the downward revision of expectation, the polite surprise that a young woman had engaged with primary sources rather than summaries. It did not come. His expression remained exactly what it had been, attentive, interested, the look of someone encountering a conversation that is going somewhere worth following. "Then you will have your own opinion on the mixed gas question," he said. "I do. I would like to hear it," she told him. He disagreed with two of her points and agreed with the third, and explained his reasoning for both positions with the kind of care that implied he considered her response worth engaging with precisely, rather than generally. She revised one of her two positions and held the other, and told him why. And he was quiet for a moment in the way of someone genuinely thinking, rather than preparing a response. "You may be right about that," he said finally. "I had not considered the data from the Edinburgh measurements." Clara, Serena noticed from the corner of her eye, had stopped writing in her notebook entirely, and was simply watching them with an expression of suppressed and highly specific satisfaction. The evening ended at 9. On the stairs going out, in the brief private interval between the door of the rooms and the street below where their carriage waited, Robert said, not looking at her, looking at the middle distance of the stairwell, "There is a lecture at the Royal Institution next month on electromagnetic principles. It will almost certainly be oversubscribed, and the seating will be inadequate, and someone in the third row will ask a question that takes 17 minutes to answer." She kept her eyes on the steps. "That sounds genuinely terrible." "It does." A pause. "I find, nevertheless, that I intend to attend." "As do I," she said, "as it happens." They reached the street. He handed her into the carriage, his hand warm through her glove, and gone before she could decide what to do about that warmth, and stood back. "Good evening, Miss Ashwood." "Good evening, my lord." The carriage moved. Clara turned to her with the notebook still in her hand, and the expression of someone who has witnessed a great deal and is exercising heroic restraint. "Natural philosophy," Clara said. "Good night, Clara." 17 minutes, Clara said, is a very long time to share an inconvenient seating arrangement with someone. Serena looked out the window at the lamplit street and said nothing, and felt the warmth from his hand in hers that had not quite entirely disappeared. The weeks that followed had a quality Serena would not have known how to name precisely, if asked. Not courtship, or not only courtship, not in the formal, directed sense of the word that the season demanded. Something more like the accumulation of a shared vocabulary, an ongoing conversation that paused between events and resumed, without awkwardness, exactly where it had left off. The Royal Institution lecture was, as advertised, oversubscribed. The seating was inadequate. A gentleman in the third row asked a question that lasted 22 minutes, which Robert noted with a quiet aside that produced in Serena the dangerous experience of suppressing laughter at an inappropriate moment in a public scientific lecture. Afterwards, they walked through the corridor with Clara somewhere tactfully behind them and discussed the speaker's methodology with the easy candor of two people who had, by this point, established that they could disagree without either of them dissolving. "You think the experimental design was flawed," she said. "I think it was adequate but not rigorous." He paused to let an older couple pass. "There is a difference. A distinction that will be lost on the 40 people who reprint the findings without reading the methodology." "On the 60 people," he corrected. "You are being optimistic." She glanced at him. He was looking ahead, the particular, almost expression she had come to recognize, the one that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to it, sharing a wall with it. She had also come to recognize, with some alarm, that producing that expression in him gave her a disproportionate and entirely unwelcome sense of satisfaction. She looked away. "You are deeply cynical about the scientific press." "I am specifically cynical about human nature, and its relationship to attractive conclusions. He looked at her then, brief and direct. "In general, I try to be realistic. And is there a difference," she asked, "between cynicism and realism?" "I have been trying to determine that," he said, "for approximately 15 years. It was the first genuinely personal thing he had said to her. She recognized it as such, the specific texture of a sentence that had let something through, and chose not to press it because she understood intuitively that pressing it would cause him to step back behind whatever wall he had briefly opened. Instead, she said, "Let me know when you arrive at a conclusion," and felt him look at her again with something she could not quite name, and they walked out into the May evening where Clara was waiting with an expression of practiced innocence. It was in June that the carriage became stranded. It had been a perfectly ordinary afternoon, a visit to the lending library on Brewer Street, where Serena had spent 40 minutes and emerged with 3 volumes and the focused expression of someone who had exercised considerable restraint. Robert had accompanied them, had developed by this point the habit of accompanying them to events with the quiet consistency of a man who has decided where he intends to spend his time and sees no particular need to announce the decision. And they had been in the carriage heading back toward Mayfair when the rain came. It was not ordinary rain. It was the kind of rain that June sometimes produced in London, sudden, complete, as though the sky had been holding it for weeks and had finally exhausted its patience. Within 3 minutes, the street outside had become a river, and the carriage had slowed to a stop because the horse, with the self-preservation instincts proper to its species, declined to continue. Clara looked out the streaming window. "Are we stopping?" "We appear to be stopping," Robert said. "For how long?" "Until the rain decides it has made its point." They were, Serena noted, very close together. The carriage was not large, and 3 people in it on a rain-hammered afternoon produced an intimacy that was simply geographical, not intentional, and yet. The windows fogged gradually. The sound of the rain was enormous and insistent, everything beyond the carriage walls reduced to grey and water. Clara had her borrowed library volume open on her lap within 4 minutes, the dedicated focus of someone who considered stranded carriages a reading opportunity. Robert and Serena sat across from each other. "The Edinburgh measurements," she said after a moment. He looked up from the middle distance where his thoughts had apparently been. "I beg your pardon?" "At Hartfields in April. You said I might be right about the Edinburgh measurements. I have been thinking about it since, and I believe I was in fact wrong." Something shifted in his expression, not surprise exactly, but a kind of recalibration. "What changed your mind?" "I found Broughton's follow-up paper. His second set of observations contradicts the assumption I was relying on." A pause. Outside, the rain against the roof. Clara turned a page. "You have been thinking about a disagreement we had in April," Robert said slowly. "For 2 months. It has been intermittent," she said, which was not entirely true. "I find it difficult to leave things unresolved." He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had a different quality, not the measured social tone, but something quieter and more direct. "As do I." The rain pressed against the glass. Clara turned another page with the dedicated focus of someone performing absolute absorption in a text. "My lord," Serena said carefully, "may I ask you something?" "You may ask me most things." "Why, at the ball, in March? You crossed the room. You did not have to." There were a dozen more convenient responses. She kept her voice even, academic, as though she were discussing the Edinburgh measurements. "I have wondered about it." He was quiet for what felt like longer than it was. Outside, the rain began, barely perceptibly to ease. "I have wondered about some things myself," he said finally, "since that evening." He looked at his hands, then at her. "The honest answer is that I was watching before Calderwick spoke, and when you answered him, I found that I had already made a decision without being fully aware of making it." Serena looked at him. "What decision?" "That I wanted to know," he said quietly. "Who you were." The rain slowed. Clara turned a page. The fog on the window was a warm private world. "And?" Serena said very quietly. "Do you?" "I am beginning to," he said. "And I find that beginning is rather beside the point, because the more I know, the more there appears to be to know." A pause. "That is, I believe, what they mean by the term inexhaustible." She looked out the fogged window at the clearing street. Her heart was doing the complicated thing again. She did not name what it was. Not yet. It clears quickly, she said of the rain. It does, he agreed. Clara very carefully did not look up from her book, but the corner of her mouth, Serena noticed, had curved upward with the suppressed satisfaction of someone who has been paying attention for a very long time. The carriage moved again, through streets washed clean and gleaming. No one said anything else. Nothing needed to be said. May gave way to June, and June pressed warmly into the long London days of midsummer. The Ashwoods had found their rhythm in the ton, not the central, effortless orbit of those born to it, but a genuine position, earned through Serena's directness, Clara's careful intelligence, and the authentic charm of a family that was exactly what it appeared to be and had stopped apologizing for it. The Duke of Calderwick had not spoken to any of them since the night of the ball. He moved through the same social spaces with the smooth indifference of a man who had decided the entire incident had not occurred, which was, Serena suspected, the most functional available option for a man of his particular vanity. She did not trouble herself about him. There was, she felt, too much else worth paying attention to. Robert was present at most of the events she attended, not ostentatiously. He did not hover, did not perform attendance, but he was there, at the margins of rooms, and when their paths crossed, which they did with a frequency that had long since ceased being coincidental, the conversation resumed where it had left off, as naturally as breathing. She had begun to notice the smaller things, the way he positioned himself at social gatherings, always with a clear view of the room, the specific watchfulness of someone accustomed to identifying where difficulty might originate before it arrived, the way he listened, not with the half-attention of social courtesy, but with the quality of someone who intended to remember what was said. The way he had, in the 6 weeks since the carriage, never quite returned to the complete reserve of their first conversations. Some door had been opened that fraction and remained quietly ajar. She noticed, too, the things he did not say. There were silences between them that were different from other silences, weighted in a specific way, like sentences that had stopped just before the most important word. She did not permit herself to name what she wanted those sentences to contain. One afternoon in late June at a garden party in Kensington, she found herself temporarily separated from Clara and her mother, standing near a row of roses and watching a small group of swallows perform their extraordinary aerial mathematics above the lawn. Robert appeared at her side with the quiet approach she had learned to recognize. He moved without announcement, arrived without intrusion. "Swallows," she said. "Yes." He watched them for a moment. "They navigate by a form of instinct we don't yet fully understand, some combination of magnetic sense and learned geography. You have read about swallows. I have read about most things." A pause. "It is a reliable strategy for avoiding conversations you would rather not have." She glanced at him sideways. "Are there many of those?" "There were," he said. "There have been fewer recently." The swallows wheeled and turned. The garden was warm and smelled of roses and cut grass. Serena held very still, the way you hold still when something true is being said and you do not want to interrupt it. "I find," Robert said quietly, looking at the birds and not at her, "that I have been looking forward to conversations I cannot predict. That is new." A pause. "You should know that." She thought about the ball in March and the Edinburgh measurements and the rain on the carriage roof and the specific warmth of a hand in hers that lasted longer than the moment itself. "I think," she said carefully, "that I should tell you something as well." She turned to face him. "I have been uncertain whether the attention was genuine or a form of charity I had not been asked to receive. I want to be honest about that." He turned to look at her then, fully, with the directness that she had come to understand was not coldness, but its precise opposite, the attention of someone who had decided not to manage a conversation, but simply to be present in it. "It is not charity," he said. The simplicity of it was unambiguous, the tone of someone stating a fact about which there is no useful ambiguity. "It has not been, from the beginning." Serena looked at him for a long moment. The swallows above them made their extraordinary calculations in the warm summer air. The garden continued its business around them, indifferent and lovely. "All right," she said quietly. "I believe you." It was, she would think later, one of the more significant things she had ever said. Not dramatic, not swept with the gestures the novels of her childhood had led her to expect. Just, I believe you. The lowering of a guard that she had not realized, until that moment, she had still been carrying. He looked at her for another moment, something in his expression that was not the almost smile, but something quieter and more serious, and, she thought, more real. Good, he said. The swallows turned once more against the blue summer sky. Clara appeared from behind a boxwood hedge with the expression of someone who has been taking a very sincere interest in topiary for the last several minutes and asks no questions at all. The rumour arrived, as rumours in London always did, not with a declaration but with a silence. Serena noticed it first at Lady Wentworth's afternoon reception on a Thursday in early July. It was not a dramatic silence, nothing so obvious as conversations stopping when she entered a room. It was subtler than that, the specific quality of attention that shifted when she passed a cluster of women near the fireplace. The way two acquaintances she had spoken with pleasantly at 3 previous events suddenly found urgent business in another direction. The smile that Mrs. Harcastle offered her, polite, careful, the smile of someone who has recently received information and has not yet decided what to do with it. Serena filed these observations without reacting to them. She had learned in the months since March that the tongue communicated as much through what it withheld as through what it said. Something had changed. She did not yet know what. She found out on Friday. Clara came to her room before breakfast, which was unusual. Clara was not by nature a person who moved urgently. She sat down on the edge of the bed with the expression of someone carrying something heavy and said without preamble, "I heard something last night. At the Forsyth dinner. I was not meant to hear it. I was near the window and 2 women came to stand beside it without noticing me." Serena sat up. "Tell me." "There is a story circulating." Clara's voice was careful, precise. She was, Serena had always known, the one of them who could report difficult things without flinching. "About us, about our family. It says that the inheritance is contested, that there are questions about the legitimacy of the title. That father's connection to the estate is not what it has been represented to be." The room was very quiet for a moment. "It is not true," Serena said. "No, it is entirely false. The solicitors confirmed everything twice." Clara paused. "That is not the problem. The problem is that it is circulating, and in this world, a story does not need to be true to do damage. It needs only to be repeated." Serena sat with this. Outside, the street was waking up. The sound of a cart, a vendor's call. The ordinary morning machinery of the city continuing its indifferent business. "Who started it?" she asked, though some part of her had already arrived at the answer. Clara was quiet for a moment. The women at the window mentioned having heard it from a mutual acquaintance. They did not name the original source, but they mentioned that it had been confirmed, their word, confirmed, by someone of significant standing. Someone of significant standing. Serena thought of a broad-shouldered man moving through ballrooms with the ease of someone who had never stood near the windows. The tightening around the eyes at the ball in March, a recalibration, not of embarrassment but of something else. Not a man who had forgotten the exchange, after all. A man who had filed it and waited. "Calderwick," she said. "I believe so." Clara looked at her steadily. "What do you want to do?" It was, Serena reflected, precisely the right question. Not what will we do, the plural that assumed she could not hold the decision alone, but what do you want, which was the question Clara had always known to ask. She thought about what was at stake, not her own position. She had begun with very little social capital and had no romantic attachment to the idea of losing it. But her mother, who had begun genuinely to enjoy London. Her father, who was proud in the quiet, deep way of a man who had worked hard and seen something good come of it. Clara, whose careful intelligence deserved a proper season and the space it required. The family her parents had built across 20 years of ordinary, earnest life. She thought about the man who had set this in motion from behind the comfortable distance of his title, because his pride had been inconvenienced by a young woman who had declined to be invisible. "I want," she said slowly, "to find out exactly what has been said and exactly how widely it has spread. And then I want to find a way to answer it that does not involve me standing in a ballroom making speeches." Clara nodded. "That seems correct. I will need to speak with Miss Croft." "She is already waiting downstairs," Clara said. "I sent for her before I came up." Serena looked at her sister. Clara returned the look with the composed expression of someone who had been solving problems quietly and efficiently her entire life and saw no reason to stop. "You are extraordinary," Serena said. "I am practical," Clara replied, which amounts to the same thing in circumstances like these. Miss Croft assessed the situation in 40 minutes with the methodical focus of a military commander reviewing a map. The rumor had spread through approximately 3 interconnected social networks, she estimated. Not yet epidemic, but moving in the specific direction of people whose opinions shaped other people's opinions. The original source could not be confirmed, but the trail pointed, with the consistency of circumstantial evidence, towards someone with access to the social tier where such a story would find immediate credence. "The difficulty," Miss Croft said, setting down her notes, "is that direct refutation often amplifies rather than diminishes. If the family were to issue a formal response, it draws attention to the story and implies it has substance worth responding to." "So what is the alternative?" Serena asked. "The alternative is a countersource, someone of equal or greater standing who can make the correct version of events the one that circulates instead." Miss Croft looked at her directly. "The question is whether such a person exists in your current social acquaintance." Serena thought about this. She thought about a man who moved through ballrooms with the quiet authority of someone who had no interest in performing power and therefore had a great deal of it. About the specific attention he gave to things that mattered and the disregard he gave to things that did not. About a conversation in a garden in Kensington where he had said without drama it has not been from the beginning. She also thought about this. She had not told him. He did not know. Whether he knew regardless, whether the story had reached him, whether he had heard it from the same networks that fed everything else into the social machine, she could not say. And the thing that stopped her from immediately seeking him out was not pride exactly, but something more careful than that. The fear that asking for his help would reframe everything that had come before it, that it would make her, in both their eyes, someone who needed saving, someone who had, all along, needed something from him. She was not sure she could bear that. She told Miss Croft she would think about it. She thanked her, sent her home, and spent the afternoon with a book she did not read, turning over a problem that had nothing to do with the Edinburgh measurements and everything to do with the question of whether independence and trust could occupy the same space without destroying each other. She did not seek him out. He found her instead. It was Saturday, a concert in Marylebone, a small affair at the Musical Society rooms where they had been before, a program of Schubert and Mendelssohn that Serena had been genuinely looking forward to before everything had gone sideways. She went anyway, because retreating from public life would signal exactly what the rumor needed her to signal, and because the music, she thought, might quiet the noise in her head. Robert was there. He always seemed to be where she was these days, with the quiet consistency she had stopped attributing to coincidence and started simply accepting as the pattern of things. He greeted her in the lobby as people took their seats, and something in his expression was different. Not alarmed, not performing normalcy, but carrying a specific attentiveness she had not seen before. "I would like to speak with you," he said, low enough for only her to hear. "After the program, if you are willing." She looked at him. "About." He met her eyes. "About something that should not have happened and will not continue." The concert was Schubert first, then Mendelssohn, and it was beautiful, and Serena heard approximately half of it. She was aware of Robert 3 seats to her left, the contained stillness of him, the fact that he did not lean over and speak during the music, which was either courtesy or the behavior of a man holding something very carefully. She suspected both. Afterwards, in the corridor, he led her to a small anteroom off the main hallway, a reading room, a few chairs, the door left open for propriety, and turned to face her. "I heard it 4 days ago," he said, without preliminary. "I should have come to you sooner. I did not because I wanted to be certain of what I was doing before I did it." A pause. "It has been addressed. 3 conversations. The right 3, with the right people. The original account has been corrected, and the correction attributed to sources that will be considered definitive." He paused again. "It will not spread further, and what has already spread will be replaced." Serena looked at him. The corridor beyond the open door murmured with departing concertgoers. A lamp burned on the small table between them. "You did this," she said, "without telling me." "Yes," without asking whether I wanted it done that way. Something moved across his face. Not defensiveness, but the genuine consideration of a man who has encountered a perspective he had not fully anticipated. I acted quickly because quickly was necessary. I should have told you. A pause, the quality of a man making an honest admission rather than a strategic one. I'm accustomed to solving things alone. I did not think about what it would mean to you to not have been consulted. That was wrong. She looked at him for a long moment. The lamp flickered once. Calderwick, she said. Yes. He will not. He will not. The tone was quiet and entirely certain, the voice of a man who had made something clear in terms that did not require elaboration. It is finished. She absorbed this. The residual anger at being acted upon, at the paternalism of being protected without being asked, was real, and she held it, and she also held the other thing alongside it. The image of him, 4 days ago, quietly and efficiently dismantling a man's malice because he had decided it would not stand, and doing it with none of the performance that would have made it useful to him socially, and telling her now not because it put him in a favorable light, but because she deserved to know. Why? She asked. The word came out smaller than she intended. Not, why did you stop it? I understand that. Why did you not make it visible? You could have. It would have done you no harm to be seen defending us. He was quiet for a moment in the way she had come to understand, meant he was choosing words precisely rather than quickly. Because it was not for others to see, he said. It was for you. The lamp burned steadily. Somewhere beyond the door, the last of the concert-goers made their way into the street. Serena looked at him, at the contained, careful face that had been, she realized, not a mask, but a shell. The specific protection of a man who had learned that the interior was worth keeping private because very few people handled it with care. You should have told me, she said. Yes, he said. I should have. I'm sorry. The apology was simple and direct, without qualification or performance. She believed it completely. I am not accustomed, she said slowly, to being protected. My family does not have the history for it. I have always been the one who handles things. She paused. It is difficult to receive help without feeling that it changes what you are. It doesn't, he said. You answered a duke in front of 500 people with nothing but your own words. No one did that for you. He looked at her directly. That does not change because someone addressed a rumor on your behalf. She breathed in slowly. Outside, London went about its business in the summer evening, entirely indifferent to the conversation happening in this small lamplit room. No, she said. I suppose it does not. He took a step toward her, not closing the distance entirely, but reducing it. The specific movement of someone who has decided something and is no longer pretending otherwise. Serena, he said. It was the first time he had used her name. The formality had gone out of it all at once, simply and permanently. I should like to tell you something, and I would like to tell it to you directly, without managing the context of it. She looked at him, her heart was very loud. All right. I have not been uncertain, he said. I want to be clear about that. Since the first evening, since the moment you turned and answered him and I understood, with the specific certainty of something obvious, that I wanted to know who you were, I have not been uncertain. He paused. I have been slow. Slower than I should have been. That is a failing, I acknowledge. You are telling me this now, she said carefully, after stopping a rumor on my behalf. I want to be sure. They are not connected, he said with quiet firmness. What I am telling you now I would have told you regardless. I was going to tell you at the garden party in Kensington, and then I thought I needed more time, and then I thought, there is no more time to require. There is only whether I say it or don't say it. He looked at her steadily. I am saying it. Serena was quiet for a long moment. The lamplight was warm. The room was very still. I have not been uncertain either, she said finally. I told myself I was. I constructed very reasonable arguments for uncertainty, but they were arguments, not the truth. She paused. The truth is that I have been paying attention to you for 4 months, and the more attention I have paid, the less sense any other direction seems to face. Something changed in his expression, not the almost smile, not the contained reserve, something real and unmanaged and quietly luminous. Then we are agreed, he said. "We are agreed," she said. He lifted her hand, slowly, entirely without haste, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. It was entirely proper, perfectly correct, by every standard the Tun could apply. And it rearranged something fundamental in the architecture of the evening in a way that had nothing to do with propriety at all. "I intend," he said against her hand, "to speak to your father. He is in his study most mornings," she said. "He prefers directness." "Good." He released her hand. The warmth remained. "So do I." Robert Ellsworth called on Mr. Ashwood the following Monday morning. Serena knew he was coming, had known since Saturday, since the lamplit anteroom and the warmth that had not entirely left her hand on the carriage ride home. She had told no one except Clara, who had received the information with the expression of someone for whom this particular development had ceased to be surprising approximately 6 weeks ago and had simply been waiting for the relevant parties to catch up. She did not hover near her father's study. She sat in the drawing room with a book, the same book she had not read on Friday, which was accumulating a remarkable number of unread hours, and listened to the house. The front door at 9:45, her father's voice and then a lower one. The study door closing. Clara came in at 10 and sat down with her embroidery. "You are not going to pretend to read," Clara said, without looking up. "I'm going to try. You have been on the same page for 11 minutes. Serena turned the page. Clara's mouth curved. They sat in companionable silence, the morning light moving slowly across the drawing-room floor, the sounds of the street filtering through the windows. Their mother was upstairs, engaged in correspondence, and had not yet been told what was happening in her husband's study, a situation that could not persist much longer without becoming genuinely unkind. The study door opened at 10:32. Serena heard her father's footsteps, and then the front door, and then her father's footsteps again. Slower, the thoughtful pace of a man processing something. He appeared in the drawing-room doorway. He was a compact, quiet man who had spent his life doing practical things with careful attention, and he looked at this moment as though he had just been shown something he had not expected to find and was taking stock of it. He looked at Serena for a long moment. Then he said, "He is a good man." It was not a long speech. Her father was not given to long speeches, but the 3 words carried the full weight of his consideration, and Serena understood exactly what they meant. "Yes," she said. "I know." Her father nodded with the manner of a man who has said what needed saying and went back to his study. Clara set down her embroidery needle and looked at Serena with the radiant, suppressed satisfaction of someone who has been patient for a very long time. "Well," Clara said. "Well," Serena agreed, and felt something loosen in her chest that she had not realized until it loosened had been held. The formal period that followed was, by the standards of the Tun, brief. Robert was not a man who saw the value in extending processes that had already reached their conclusions, and Serena, who shared this view with considerable conviction, found the efficiency entirely welcome. He called every other day. They walked in the park with Clara at the requisite distance behind them. They attended 2 more evenings at Hartfield's, where their conversations had taken on a new quality, not different in substance, but different in the ease of them, the sense of 2 people who no longer needed to navigate around the things they were not saying. One afternoon in late July, at a small musical gathering at the Harcastle House in Marylebone, he sat beside her during a piano recital and said very quietly, without looking at her, "I have been thinking about Dalton." She kept her eyes on the pianist. "Have you?" "Your Edinburgh point. I have reread Broughton's paper." A pause. "You were right to revise your position, but I think your original instinct was also right. In a way, Broughton's second set does not entirely disprove." She considered this. The pianist moved into a Chopin nocturne, unhurried and liquid. "You are suggesting that 2 contradictory things can both be partially correct. I am suggesting it is worth holding open questions with more patience than we usually do." He glanced at her sideways. "I find I have become more comfortable with that recently." She looked at him. He was watching the pianist again, the composed profile, the particular quality of a man who has said something he means in the quietest possible way and has no intention of underlining it. "As have I," she said. The Chopin continued. Around them, 20 people listened in the warm, candle-lit room, and none of them were paying attention to the 2 people in the 3rd row who were not talking about natural philosophy at all. It was in the music room of Ashbourne House that he asked her. She had been there twice before. Once for a small gathering of the Literary Society, once to collect a book he had offered to lend her on atmospheric science that turned out to be the best volume on the subject she had ever read. The room was on the first floor, south-facing, with tall windows that in the afternoon caught the full warmth of the summer light. A Broadwood piano stood near the window. Shelves of music lined one wall. The room had the quality of a space that was genuinely used rather than displayed. On this particular afternoon in early August, Clara had found something urgently fascinating about the garden below, and had taken herself there with the focused intentionality of someone who has decided exactly where they need to be. Serena stood near the piano, running her fingers along the edge of the keys without pressing them. Robert stood a few feet away, and there was a quality to the silence between them that she had come to recognize, the specific texture of something about to be said. "I have been considering," he said, "how to do this correctly." She turned. He was looking at her with the directness that had nothing managed about it, the full attention of a man who had decided to be entirely present. "And," she said, "and I have concluded that there is no correct way that is also an honest way." He crossed the room in 3 unhurried steps, not dramatic, not performed, simply moving to where he needed to be. "So I will say it plainly." He reached for her hand. "I love you. I have loved you since approximately the 3rd conversation we had, at which point the sensation was already too familiar to be new." A pause. "I would very much like you to be my wife, Serena. Not because it is the expected conclusion to a season's courtship, not because it resolves anything tidily, because you are inexhaustible, as I said once before, and I intend to spend a considerable portion of my remaining years finding out what that means." Serena looked at him. At the face she had been paying attention to for 5 months, the almost smiles and the real ones, the reserve that was not coldness, and the attentiveness that was not performance. The man who had crossed a ballroom and quietly dismantled a duke's malice, and said it was for you and meant it. She thought about the girl who had stood near the windows at Lord Ashmore's ball, wondering if she would ever find someone who saw the world as she did. "Yes," she said. It came out steadier and more certain than almost anything she had ever said. "The answer is yes, Robert. It has been yes for some time." His expression changed, the thing she had not seen before, in the anteroom, returning now without restraint. Something real and unguarded, and quietly extraordinary on the face of a man who had spent considerable time being neither. He raised her hand to his lips and then, without drama, without the performed sweep of a gesture meant to be observed, drew her closer and kissed her. It was not long. It was not tentative. It was the kiss of 2 people who had for some months been extremely patient, and had now concluded that patience had been sufficiently practiced. When it ended, she stayed where she was, close enough to feel the warmth of him. "Your father," she said against his shoulder. "Spoke to him this morning." A pause. "He said it was about time." She laughed. Genuinely, the full, unguarded laugh she had been suppressing in drawing rooms and ballrooms and lecture halls for the entirety of the season. He made a sound that was unmistakably the same. Downstairs, Clara sat in the garden with a book she was actually reading, and did not ask any questions when they appeared later, and went home that evening with the peaceful expression of someone whose patience has been entirely, finally, rewarded. They were married in September. The ceremony was held at the parish church in Ashford, Kent, in the village nearest the Ashwood estate, the land that had started all of it, the unlikely inheritance that had sent a family into London society with good intentions and no map. The church was small and very old and smelled of stone and beeswax, and the late summer flowers that Clara had arranged with the focus she brought to everything that mattered to her. The guests were few. This had been Serena's preference, and Robert had agreed without discussion, which was itself a statement about the nature of what they had built, something that did not require an audience to be real. Their mother wept, beautifully and without apology. Their father stood very straight and looked at his eldest daughter with the expression of a man watching something he had hoped for come true, and did not trust himself to speak until afterward. Clara stood at Serena's side with dry eyes and a smile she made no attempt to conceal. Robert, at the altar, watched Serena walk toward him with the quality of attention she had come to understand as his most native form of expression, not performance, not courtesy, simply the full and unhurried presence of a man who intended to remember exactly this. When the vicar asked, they both answered clearly and without hesitation. Afterward, in the churchyard, where the September light came through the old yews at a slant and made everything amber and specific, Robert took her hand. Not ceremonially, not as a gesture, but simply because it was where his hand had decided to be. "Countess of Ashbourne," he said. "I am aware of the title," she said. "You do not seem particularly overwhelmed by it." "I am working on being precisely what I am," she said, without apology. "I believe I have made some progress on that front." He looked at her, the real smile, the one that rearranged his face and made him look younger and entirely himself. "You have," he said, "considerable progress." She leaned against his arm in the September light, in the churchyard of the village nearest the land that had changed everything, and felt with a completeness she had not known she was capable of that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. And so ends the story of Miss Serena Ashwood, the young woman who stood near the windows and refused to be invisible, and found, in the most unexpected place, someone who had been watching from the beginning. If this story found its way into your heart, I would love to know. Leave a comment below to tell me your favorite moment, your favorite line, the scene that stayed with you. And if you have not yet subscribed, please consider doing so now. Every subscriber means these stories reach someone new, someone who might need exactly this. A reminder that being entirely, unapologetically yourself is not a liability. It is, in the end, the thing that makes you findable. Thank you for listening. I will see you in the next story. 2 years later, Ashbourne House, Derbyshire. November 1854. The library was Robert's favourite room, and had been for as long as he could remember. The high shelves, the particular quality of morning light through the east windows, the fire that burned from October through April with reliable constancy. He had spent 20 years in this room reading about the things the world contained, and had found, in the last 2 of them, that the room had acquired a second quality it had not previously possessed. It was more interesting with someone else in it. Serena sat in the chair nearest the fire, his chair which she had claimed with the calm annexation of someone who does not acknowledge the concept of his chair as a meaningful category, with her feet tucked beneath her and a volume of Humboldt open on her knee. She had been corresponding with a naturalist in Edinburgh about the atmospheric measurements question, a correspondence that had produced 3 letters and 1 mild academic disagreement conducted with visible enjoyment by both parties. Robert watched her for a moment before she noticed him. This was a habit he had not tried to break, the specific pleasure of observing her when she was absorbed, the way the concentration settled on her face, the occasional small sound she made when she encountered something worth noting. She looked up and caught him watching. "You are doing it again," she said. "I am not aware of doing anything." "You are standing in the doorway being quietly observant." She tilted her head. "It is, I have concluded, incurable." "Almost certainly." He crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her, which was his actual chair. She had claimed the better one with the better light and the closer proximity to the fire, and he had never once considered objecting. "The Edinburgh letter came this morning. I saw it." She turned a page of Humboldt. "Professor Cairn agrees with my revised position and disagrees with my original one, which means he has read the same Broughton paper I have. I intend to write back and suggest he read the original data set, which Broughton's paper summarizes rather than reproduces." "You are conducting a scientific correspondence," Robert said, "with a professor at the University of Edinburgh." "I am correcting a professor at the University of Edinburgh," she said pleasantly. "There is a distinction." He looked at her. She looked back at him over the top of Humboldt, with the expression he had learned in 2 years to recognize as the one that was closest to what she actually was, interested, direct, quietly amused, entirely herself. He thought about the girl near the windows at Lord Ashmore's ball, who had turned and answered a duke and changed the geometry of an entire evening. He thought about Edinburgh measurements and carriage rain and the anteroom in Marylebone and September light in a churchyard in Kent. "Clara writes that she has accepted an invitation to the Pemberton lecture series," he said. "She wrote to me as well. She is also conducting a correspondence with Dr. Pemberton's assistant, though she insists it is purely scientific." Serena's eyes returned to her book with the focus of someone who has delivered a piece of information and considers its implications entirely Clara's business. She will be fine. She will be extraordinary, Robert said. The family tends toward that. Serena looked up at him again. The fire crackled. Outside, Derbyshire was doing what Derbyshire did in November, making everything grey and particular and strangely beautiful, the light low and silver across the moors. Robert. Yes, I am glad, she said simply, that you crossed the room. He was quiet for a moment in the way that meant he was feeling something precisely. Then he reached across and took her hand where it rested on the arm of his chair, her chair, and held it with the easy certainty of a man who has found where he intends to stay. So am I, he said, every day. The fire burned. The Derbyshire morning went about its slow, silver business. Serena returned to Humboldt, her hand in his, and the library held them both, as it had and would for a very long time. The end.